and welcome to Dining with Death, where we discuss infamous cases of death and murder that have an element of food to them. And then I cook or sample the food from the case. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. If there is one thing about me, it's that I don't have any interest in romance novels or romance films or rom-coms. I don't know why. It's just something that doesn't appeal to me, but I know I'm in the minority there. I know many people really enjoy those things, and one of those people was my beloved Grandma Chamberlain. She left us a few years ago, but that woman loved her a trashy romance novel, and being in a very conservative town with a conservative family, I noticed something. When I was younger, she'd have her romance novels right by her recliner, so she could have easy access to them. But as the kids got older, the grandkids that is, they disappeared. I know she still read them because I would see them on her nightstand in her room, but she stopped leaving them out in the open, thinking maybe the grandkids would pick them up and see something they shouldn't. Well, today we are talking about a woman very unlike me who loved romance novels so much that she became a writer of them. The more salacious, the better. This is Nancy Brophy. Nancy loved romance and she loved guns. And she loved talking about and writing about guns, which I think is probably unusual for a romance writer, right? But the subject of today's episode was an unusual person, so that fits. We don't know a lot about Nancy Brophy's early life. We mainly know only details about what happened after she did what she did. But that might change because, you see, just like with Candy Montgomery and Joyce McKinney, someone is going to make a film about Nancy. If you haven't watched my episodes entitled Candy Montgomery and the one entitled The Manacled Mormon, they're on my playlist True Crime Tuesday, and they're two of not only my favorites, but your favorites as well. This story is also about a dangerous woman. Nancy was born in 1950 and is the daughter of two lawyers. She was raised in Wichita Falls, Texas. She attended and graduated from the University of Houston, and then at some point she moved to Portland. She worked in various industries there in Oregon for years, and then Nancy decided to attend culinary school. It was the early 1990s, and Nancy enrolled at Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts in Portland, Oregon. That is where she met Daniel Brophy, who was an instructor at the school. Soon, the student and the teacher were dating, and they fell in love. They were married, and for over 20 years, they lived a very usual and normal life, during which Nancy also became a culinary instructor at the same school. Now, later on, it would come out that Nancy Brophy had actually been married 4 times. Daniel was her 4th husband, and people who knew her well describe her as having a complicated personality. That's probably the nicest way I heard her described. Other people said she was a little bit of a lunatic. She was kind of high-strung and could be very difficult, and her thoughts were not always linear. As Nancy is working as a culinary instructor in Portland, she began writing romance novels, and she gained a little bit of a following for romance novels, which also featured guns and murder. Apparently, Nancy's novels are quite colorful. They are, as I said, salacious, and along with the sex and the romance, there is always a murder in the stories, and there was always a lot of details about guns in the stories as well. Nancy sounds like quite a character, right? She began writing around 2003, and her books are called things like The Wrong Lover and The Wrong Hero and The Wrong Husband. So there was a theme happening there, and it wasn't just that wrong was in the title, there was a lot of wrong going on in Nancy's life. In 2011, Nancy wrote an essay for a publication that was entitled How to Murder Your Husband. It seems that this particular work was more actual instruction than work of fiction, and Nancy Brophy was going to put it to use. It is now June of 2018. Nancy and Daniel were having financial problems. They liked to spend more than they made, and they weren't great with their money. In fact, they had to take out $35,000 from their retirement account, which was about half of what they had saved, in order to catch up on late mortgage payments and pay off some credit cards they had let get out of control. So they were really struggling. Nancy had grown tired of the struggles of daily life, and she had grown tired of Daniel. He had some life insurance, and he had some savings as well that Nancy wanted access to, and she decided that her life would be better if Daniel simply wasn't around anymore. On June 2nd, 2018, Daniel's students began arriving at the culinary school for their daily classes, but something was off. The doors to the school were open, but it was unusually quiet inside. The students didn't hear Daniel in the kitchen working and preparing for the day as he usually would be, so they started to wander around looking for him. As one of the students turned the corner into a small area where the industrial ice makers stood, they found him. Daniel Brophy was laid out on the floor with 5-gallon buckets of ice and water all around him, ice that was melting into the pool of blood coming from Daniel's body. Daniel Brophy was dead. The students called the police and Daniel's body was taken for autopsy. It was discovered that he had died from one gunshot to the back and a second gunshot to the chest. Both were fired from very close range. How many of us have had a job where we had to go in and open up in the morning and we were there alone? So you can picture this very easily, right? You're there, it's early in the day, everyone hasn't started showing up yet, and you hear somebody behind you and, ugh. I think that's what fascinates so many of us with true crime is just how alike the stories are to our own lives and just how easily your whole life can change or end on a random morning. The police began to investigate Daniel's murder. Of course, they went straight to Nancy, who put on a very convincing act, stating she didn't know anything about what had happened, and initially the police believed her and ruled her out as a suspect. But over the next few months, all of that would change. As part of their usual investigation, the police did a search of Nancy and Daniel's home computer. Months before the murder, in 2017, while Nancy was at home and it was proven Daniel was at work, someone had done a lengthy internet search on the term ghost guns. For those of you who might not be aware, a ghost gun is a gun that cannot be traced. For the most part, these guns are made up of parts that can be purchased online and then used to assemble a gun at home, a gun with no serial number. It's one of the loopholes that we need to close in order to be able to track guns, the same way we track cars, boats, and stereo equipment, for hell's sakes. I've said it before and I will say it always, keep your guns, and I'm going to keep mine. But when you have to have a license to catch a fish in a freaking lake, and you do not have to have a license to own a death machine, we done messed up. I mean, we can track a car anywhere. We've got the VIN number, the parts can be tracked. You know, it's not as if we don't know how to do this, right? Have your guns. I don't care. Have your guns. But they should be tracked and they should be registered and the people that own them should be licensed. But anyway, that is what a ghost gun is, a gun that cannot be traced. Officers find this search on the home computer and they begin to track Nancy's activities. They discover that not long before the murder, Nancy purchased a Glock along with $15,000 worth of other guns. So Nancy and Daniel are so broke that they're having to take money out of their retirement account to catch up the mortgage, but she's spending 15 grand on guns. That is the definition of a gun nut, for sure. As the police continued to dig around in Nancy's personal life, they realized that she has also purchased just the barrel of a Glock on eBay, along with some other gun parts. So they think what Nancy did was order this gun barrel, just that one part, to try and build her own gun. But she didn't have the skill to do that. So instead, she took a Glock that she had purchased from a gun show and switched the barrels out to create kind of a partial ghost gun. And of course, what type of gun had Daniel been shot with? A Glock. The investigators get a hold of all the surveillance footage from different businesses and traffic lights nearby the culinary school, and plain as day on several pieces of tape, there's Nancy Brophy's minivan right near the culinary school at about the time Daniel was shot and killed. It was all adding up. Nancy Brophy had shot and murdered her husband in cold blood. In September 2018, Nancy was arrested and charged with murder with a firearm and unlawful use of a weapon. Her trial was scheduled for October 2020, but was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As Nancy sat in jail waiting to go to trial, she began talking with her cellmate, this woman named Andrea Jacobs. Nancy told Andrea that she shot her husband. She was very close to him when she did so, and she said her husband turned to look at her right before he died. She basically admitted to the murder. Well, Andrea came forward and quietly told the prosecutors what she knew. When Nancy finally did go to trial in late 2020, she started claiming that she had no memory of the day her husband was murdered. Her defense team hired a psychiatrist who claimed Nancy had retrograde amnesia and that the amnesia was from the trauma Nancy suffered when she found out her husband had been murdered. The things these people come up with, they always think they're the smartest person in the room. They always think the rest of us are dumb, and they're going to be able to come up with some excuse. And I know their defense attorneys are grasping at straws. Believe me, I get it. But there's just, the level of garbage that comes out when they're caught. There were some other legal postponements, and then Nancy decided to take a deal. On January 18th, 2021, Nancy Brophy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and unlawful use of a weapon. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case received significant media attention due to the fact that Nancy, a self-proclaimed gun enthusiast and writer of murder mysteries, was actually accused of committing murder in real life. People were really fascinated with this story. It's not very often that we see women sneak up on their husbands at work and shoot them. That just isn't usually how women kill. So that was also interesting. But what was more interesting is that Nancy had been a writer of these kind of wild and sexy romance books that also had storylines revolving around murder and guns. It's kind of similar to a Brian Coburg situation or a Stephen Griffith's story, where those men studied serial killers and then became serial killers. Only Nancy wasn't studying killers, she was writing about them, and then she became one. I found Nancy very easily by doing an inmate search. She is at the Coffee Creek Correctional Institute in Wilsonville, Oregon, and she is currently 72 years old. She will most likely die in prison because she's going to be there for a very long time. I hope she has some good reading material. Stay with me because right now we're going to do something a little bit different. Both Nancy and Daniel were instructors at a culinary school, so I have put together a little course that I'm calling Culinary School 101. We're going to do it right now as we go dining with death. I figured the best thing to do in talking about this story of the killer culinary teacher would be to give you a basic, really basic 101 cooking class. Now you might think that involves cooking, right? It doesn't. The first things that you learn in culinary training have to do with equipment, they have to do with kitchen decorum, and they have to do with rules. The very first thing you're going to talk about in culinary class is your knife. I am not sponsored. Dalstrong, hit me up. This is a chef's knife, and it's just about all you really need. It's very, very sharp, and it should always be very, very sharp. The parts of the knife. Let's see if I can remember these in order. The tip, the flat, the spine, and then it goes bolster. These are the rivets. This is obviously the handle. This is the butt of the knife. This is called the tang. This is called the heel. And this is obviously the edge. How do you hold your knife? There is always, like in everything, a little bit of controversy surrounding this, but this is the way I was taught. These 3 fingers go around the handle of the knife, under the heel. Your thumb goes here. Your index finger goes here. That is the knife grip. A lot of people, I've got fingerprints all over it now. A lot of people want to hold their knife back here. Totally incorrect. You want to hold your knife, the actual blade, the flat of the knife, really tightly with that thumb and index finger, and then wrap the 3 other fingers around the handle. This gives you total control over the knife when you're doing that rocking and chopping motion, or if you're chopping like this. Now I'm going to show you what you do with your other hand. I'm going to tell you guys the hardest thing for me about being on TikTok, because I follow a lot of food creators, because hello, that's like my favorite thing. The way people cut is second only to the fact that they use mandolins like they're nothing. A mandolin is such a dangerous kitchen instrument, and I just see people on TikTok holding the mandolin up in the air with like a potato or a cucumber, just going like this with it, you know? I'll tell you, you will only cut yourself on a mandolin once, and you will use the guard forever after that. I don't know if you can see this scar. Can you see right there? I've seen the bone. I've seen the inside of this finger from a mandolin, and I was using the guard. I was washing the mandolin. I put it down in the sink, and I have an autoimmune condition that affects my joints. I was standing at the sink, and my knee gave out. And as my knee gave out, my hands were on the edge of the sink, and the mandolin was right here. My knee gave out, and I fell into the sink, and this hand hit the blade of the mandolin and completely took off the whole top of that finger. So I don't know if you can see, I can't really see it, but yeah, I could see the bone. And it was Easter Sunday, so I didn't want to go to the doctor. I didn't want to miss Easter dinner. So I wrapped it up, and I mean, you do what you do in a kitchen, and I just kind of went, I really should have gone and got stitches. Don't be dumb like me. But chopping is really dangerous, can be really dangerous, and using a mandolin is always something you should really, you know, what they always taught us is respect the blade, respect the blade. And I did not go to a culinary school. I was trained as an apprentice, but respect the blade. So chopping, okay? First you want to hold your knife the way you're supposed to hold your knife. And with the other hand, if you're left or right-handed, you make what's called the claw. You take these four fingers, turn them under, and then the thumb just goes right behind. So you make a little claw that way. I see so many people chopping, and they think because they're doing it this way, but then their thumb is sticking out, you're just gonna cut your thumb. So if you have that thumb pinned right behind those four fingers and you make that claw, what happens is the knuckles, the tip of the knuckles rest on the knife like this. And you can't cut your fingers. It's impossible if you're doing this right, because they're not anywhere near the knife blade. As you travel down the vegetable or whatever it is that you're cutting, you know, the hand goes with it. You're not feeding. I see so many people feeding what they're cutting into the knife. That's just the surest way in the world to cut your finger. And I speak from experience. This finger right here, oh, it actually looks better on camera than I thought it would. When I get my nails done, they always ask me if I want the fingernail to be crooked like my finger is, because I've cut the tip of this finger off several times, so it is wonky looking. It looks better than I thought it would. I've always thought it looked weirder than that. But it's also my guitar finger that has the callus on it. So it's the tip I cut off and the callus that I need the most. Works out really great for me. But if you do this, after I learned this technique, and that was a long time ago before I had any training, but if you use this technique and you use those knuckles as a guide as you chop and keep that thumb out of the way, then you will never cut yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna demonstrate on a cutting board. I think the second most important thing that you'll learn in culinary training is mise en place. Mise en place is French for everything in its place. And what it means is that before you actually fire, before you actually begin to cook, every part of your dish should be in its place. Your prep work should be done, all of your ingredients should be laid out, and everything should have a little spot. You're supposed to be able to grab everything from where you're standing, because when you're in a commercial kitchen, there are times when you have this much space to work. If you're on the fry station, you're on the fish station, you're on garnish, you're on appetizers, you don't have an island to work on. You have a very small space. So you're taught to work in a very small area and lay all of your ingredients out in a way that makes sense to you. Some chefs are horrible about the way their kitchens run and they don't give people the freedom to do that. But you should just lay your ingredients out and get your mise en place. Set everything in its place. If you're gonna make risotto, you want the rice, the wine, the butter, the garlic, whatever you're putting in it, you want that all measured out and set around you. So once you fire means you're starting to cook, everything's right there. Now, what comes right after that? Cleaning as you go. And this is the thing I am the absolute worst at. I definitely took advantage of my status as a chef and got very used to having people come up and kind of help me clean up a little bit behind me, and I don't have that anymore. But if you're really going to follow the rules, you should clean as you go. You don't want to destroy your kitchen in the midst of cooking and then just have this big mess, because in a commercial kitchen you don't have that luxury. There's not enough space and there's not enough time to have a big mess. You have to clean things up as you go. If your mise en place, has a lot of dishes involved, after that dish is made, get those dishes into the dishwasher. Don't let them stack up. Don't let them pile up. I think the next thing that you're going to learn in culinary school is going to be probably how to butcher. You need to learn how to cut up a whole chicken. You need to learn how to scale and debone a fish, how to break down a lobster. There isn't a lot of beef butchery so much as it is smaller game animals and things like that. It's very, very expensive to buy all of your parts prepped. And not only that, there's a lot of waste. If you get a whole chicken in a kitchen, I can use every part of that chicken. Believe me, I'm using the chicken's toenails. Every part of that chicken is getting used in something, even if it's just to make chicken stock, because there should not be any waste. Not only is that my motto as a chef, but it's my motto as someone who eats meat and someone who hunts from time to time. If you're going to take an animal to use it in the kitchen, you should honor the taking of that life by using every part of the animal. That's just a personal belief of mine. So learn how to debone a fish, learn how to scale a fish, learn how to break down a chicken, a lobster, and learn how to portion steaks. You might have to do that. Sometimes they'll bring you like a big rib roast, or they'll bring, like a big cut in, and you have to do 8-ounce portions. And if they want 8-ounce portions, they need to be really close to 8 ounces. You can't be selling 12 ounces for 8 ounces, or then the kitchen's losing money. So you have to really develop a good eye for how to portion out meat. Then you're going to get into pan sauces, and this is where you really start to cook. If you guys are interested in more of this stuff, I can do an episode on pan sauces, or do an episode on, the very, very basics of cooking. But a pan sauce is just what it sounds like. It's a sauce that's made in a pan. Very often it starts using the fond of the meat that has been cooked in that same pan. When you sear a piece of meat in a pan in hot oil, it leaves behind those little brown bits on the bottom of the pan, and that's called fond. It leaves grease, and it leaves fat, and it leaves oils and flavors, and that's called fond. You usually take that hot pan and deglaze it with some sort of liquor, chicken stock, beer. There's a lot of ways to deglaze a pan, and then you scrape all of those brown bits up off the bottom of the pan, and that's the base of your beautiful pan sauce. From there, it's whatever you want to make it. Shallots, garlic, thyme, butter, cream. It can be really basically anything, but there are what is called the mother sauces. The 5 mother sauces, boy, this is really going back for me, are hollandaise, tomato, bechamel, espagnole, and velouté. Now, these are the 5 sauces that are associated with French cuisine, which is considered kind of the mother umbrella of cooking. A lot of people also include mayonnaise and demi-glace in the sauces, so it's 7 instead of 5. You really should know how to make mayonnaise, and you really should know how to make demi-glace. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd be happy to do a little class on making mother sauces. Might be fun, maybe a live, something like that. Any good culinary school or chef that you're apprenticing under will teach you old world methods and new methods at the same time. A great old chef will know all the tricks of the trade, all these little things that you would never even come up with. It's genius to watch them cook. And a great chef, someone like Guy Savoy, Wolfgang Puck, Gordon Ramsay, people that are really famous, they're still great chefs, and they will know the old techniques, but they will also know new techniques. Then you have the guys that are really into the gastro side of things, like the science, the foams and the mists and the steams. And, I know people really like that stuff. It's very fancy pants, but that's not the kind of cooking that I do. I cook for people that are hungry. But anyway, a great teacher will give you old information, old world information, and new world information. There are a lot of rules in a commercial kitchen. The first rule is that there's only one captain of the ship. A kitchen is run very much like a military is. There can only be one person in charge. Usually that person is the expediter, but not always. In a classic kitchen, someone stands at the pass. The pass is the place where the food comes from the kitchen out to the people that are serving it. You'll see the food sitting up on the pass. The most common jobs for the expediter in the kitchen are: 1, to call out the orders that have come into the kitchen. 2, to coordinate when all the stations bring their food to the pass so that the dish can be compiled by the expediter. The expediter usually plates, and it goes out hot and fresh. The expediter also keeps the servers in check, which, believe me, is a very big part of running a restaurant. You will find people that work for me that hate my guts. And they're justified in that. I have fired people in the middle of service. I had a server physically removed from my restaurant one night when I found out he was stealing from me. I have fired a restaurant server in the middle of service for snapping at my husband. You have to run a kitchen like you would run a military, and there can only be one captain. In my restaurant, I was the boss. My husband was the one everyone went to when they had a problem, so it worked really well. People didn't approach me so much because I was making the recipes, doing all the work, prepping, all that stuff. And I was mean. I'm kind of mean when I get in that mode. And my husband is a softer person, and he's a much more congenial person, especially under pressure. So if people had a problem, they would approach my husband first, and then they would, the two of them would come to me. But I was at a scary place in my life. I was running a restaurant that we had almost $100,000 of our own money invested into, and I wasn't my best self then. So if people hate me that worked for me, they're justified in that. I was not the greatest person in the world when I was running that restaurant, and on top of that, my family was going through something really traumatic. Someday I'll sit down and tell this whole story, but I was the boss in that restaurant, and people feared me and people disliked me. And I was okay with that at the time. If I were to open a restaurant tomorrow, which I wouldn't, I would do things a little bit differently. I would still be the boss, but I think I would be a little softer with people, and I think I would listen a little bit more, and I would be less concerned with the daily operations and more concerned with the people that were involved in them, because I didn't do such a good job of that. It's not something I'm really very proud of. Now, this has been, like I say, a bare bones list of the things that you would learn maybe in the first week or two of culinary school. It's 7 or 8 minutes here. It's very, very much bare bones. But I just wanted to do this today to show you kind of the basics, because it went with the story. And I think there's a lot of people that would be interested to know these kinds of things. So let me know if you want to see more of this. I am going to start doing some lives. I get so nervous on lives. I don't know why. And I always feel like, why would anybody want to sit and listen to me talk live for an hour? That's what's always going through my mind when I'm live on TikTok. It's like, I'm so boring. What can I'm like, should I start tap dancing, fireworks? It's weird to me that people would just want to sit and listen to me talk for an hour. But I am going to start doing some lives. The podcast. Oh, the podcast has been a thing. So I thought I had this company that had picked up my podcast, and they were going to buy the podcast, and I was going to be working for them. And at the last minute, I kind of started to get some red flags, and I pulled out of that deal. So now I'm going to be releasing the podcast on my own. That's the delay there. So there are some things coming up that I'm very excited about, and hopefully the channel's going to grow and at some point be able to support itself. That's the dream. And you guys are all here. Some of you have been here from the very beginning, and it just means the world to me. And I would just like to book a cruise ship and take everybody on a cruise and just hang out and talk about murder and eat food for a week. Wouldn't that be fabulous? Honestly. But for today, you've got your little mini cooking lesson, and you got your little true crime story. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you being here, and thank you for the support of the channel. So, subscribe if you haven't, and join my Patreon if you can. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.